Welcome to the Holotropic Psychedelic Integration Podcast. Achieve psychedelic integration by engaging with a system that's as fantastic as the journey itself. Explore Stanislav Grof's extended maps of the psyche, blending consciousness research with archetypal astrology. Referencing Stan's The Way of the Psychonaut, discover tools for healing while integrating material from deep journeys. Join archetypal astrologers James Moran and Art Granoff for continuing HPI conversation every 2 weeks. Welcome to Holotropic Psychedelic Integration Podcast, Episode 1.
Welcome, everybody.
I'm Art Granoff.
And I'm James Moran.
Albert Hofmann, who discovered LSD, is called the father of LSD. If I am the father of LSD, then Stan Grof is the godfather who brought my wonder child through a difficult time. Albert Hofmann. Here's a little bit about Stan's background. Who do you think we may turn to for psychedelic integration? Who was there at the LSD beginning? Stan Grof. While a medical student in Prague in 1954, I was one. Sat with patients and clients, documenting their experience. After Stan had his first LSD session in 1956, he decided to dedicate his life to healing of the psyche, which he later coined holotropic, moving towards wholeness. As a medical student in 1954, Stan volunteered to sit for LSD sessions in initial research. He graduated in 1956 with an MD degree, received his PhD dissertation on the clinical uses of psychedelic drugs in 1965. And from 1967 to 69, he was a research fellow at the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Science of the Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore, Maryland. 1969 to 1973, Chief of Psychiatric Research at the Maryland Psychiatric Research Center in Cantonsville, Maryland, and Assistant Professor of Psychiatry at the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences, the Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore. From 1973 through 87 was a scholar in residence at the Esalen Institute in Big Sur, California, where with his late wife, Christina Grof, he developed holotropic breathwork, the non-drug way to explore the deep psyche. And for 20 years, Stan was a professor of psychology at the California Institute of Integral Studies in San Francisco. Stan recovering from a stroke in 2018, and with Brigitte Grof, recently started Grof Legacy Project to train the next generation of psychonauts.
All right, so my name is James Moran. I'm an archetypal astrologer. And I first got introduced to the work of Stan Grof actually when I was a teenager. My mother was dating somebody who was a holotropic breathwork facilitator in the early 1990s, like 91, maybe something like that. And basically my mother and him had strewn about the house books, Stan's books, which I started to read, and I became fascinated. I read the first one was The Holotropic Mind. I became really fascinated at age 14, 15. And I actually wanted to experiment myself with that depth of healing. And I did, but I really didn't have the kind of built-in supervision structure that the research in those books had. And so I ended up hospitalized, basically on something equivalent of like a overdose in the psychedelic journey. And after that, my mother was like, "Why don't you try holotropic breath work? Because that's a way of accessing those states, that depth of healing without using drugs." I tried it when I was 15, And then when I was 16, I met Stan. I live in the Washington, D.C. area, and he used to come here every year for a holotropic breathwork retreat. And so I got to meet him and have lunch with him and did the holotropic workshop, the retreat with him. And then I would, every time he came to town, I would be with him, and that inspired me to go to school on the West Coast in Santa Cruz, California, because Stan Grof was located on the West Coast. MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, was over there. Spiritual Emergency Network was over there. Sasha Shulgin, the chemist, the chemist famous for synthesizing psychedelic substances, was over there. And so I went to school out there, but at that time I really couldn't find anything going on in terms of the psychedelic assisted healing field, because there wasn't much going on. There wasn't much sanction. There wasn't much research going on. So I ended up traveling abroad to India in my junior year and studying yoga and meditation. And that ended up being my path for like a decade and a half. And then one day a childhood friend came up to me and was like, "Hey, you should check out astrology." And I was like, "Astrology? That sounds," I mean, I never gave credence to astrology. It sounded very archaic. And he was like, "Oh, it's simple, you know," and he kind of gave me a breakdown. He said, "Read this book, Cosmos and Psyche." I checked it out. I read it. I absolutely devoured it. I felt that the archetypal symbolism mentioned in that book felt familiar to me. It felt like my native tongue. And my friend was like, "Well, you're lucky because you live on the West Coast, which is where the author of that book, Richard Tarnas, teaches." And then I came to know that he was a protege of Stan Grof. So that took me full circle back to Grof almost 2 decades later. I studied with both of them at Esalen, and then proceeded to study with both of them at California Institute of Integral Studies. And ever since then, it's just I've dedicated my life to the archetypal holotropic worldview. So that is the archetypal astrology, and holotropic is the work of Stan in discovering through the use of psychedelics that there's a potential to activate in the human psyche a healing process that moves us towards wholeness. And so those two get paired together. The archetypal astrology actually comes out of the holotropic worldview. Archetypal astrology comes out of Stan's work with psychedelics. Richard Tarnas was his protege. So that's been my life's dedication. And that's me.
Wow. Thank you. That's great. Art, first did holotropic breathwork in 2006 and found it remarkable. A few years later, I heard Stan mention archetypal astrology, that it was the cutting edge of psychology, and it was important for healing after psychedelics. And so I said, astrology? What? Seems a little weird, but if Stan mentioned it, I'll do it. So I started studying astrology. I read Cosmos and Psyche, and then I had some readings with a couple of archetypal astrologers and did some training. And yeah, I said, I'll learn it. So, and I started psychedelics as a young guy, as a teenager at Grateful Dead concerts. We would go there, and thousands of people at one time would take LSD or something like that and have a grand time at a concert with thousands of people having a wonderful time with music. Similar to the Road to Eleusis, the Eleusinian Mysteries, where many people got together and had a deep initiation and left feeling pretty good. You know, I got in, just between you and me, I got into this whole thing because I didn't understand what was happening to me through my psychedelic experience, right? And then when I heard about Stan and started reading his books, it really started to make sense for me. And then when I heard about Rick and did the astrology, everything clicked. So I feel like I got cured from all this. And I think other people have the same inclination. They're in the same place I was, perhaps. They're all high, not knowing what the fuck's going on after that.
Yeah, man.
No, don't know where to look.
That's
And if we
very
could
cool.
establish that Stan We know it's true, but we want to establish Stan as the expert and master of this stuff. And we, the little students, come in and eat his food, and now we're talking about it.
Right,
That's
right.
essentially the idea of this podcast. Our new podcast is designed for psychedelic integration, also known as healing the holotropic way, moving towards wholeness. And we're going to focus on Stan's consciousness research and archetypal astrology. With Stan's encyclopedia, The Way of the Psychonaut, each episode, we're going to play a few minutes and talk about it. And here's the first one.
Forward by Richard Tarnas, PhD. We all sense today that humanity and the Earth community have reached a tremendous crossroads, and the stakes can hardly be overstated. Ecological, spiritual, psychological, social, political. Pervading our era is an atmosphere of crisis, of radical transformation, perhaps a moment for the changing of the gods, as C.G. Jung put it near the end of his life. The fundamental principles and symbols that have governed our civilization are undergoing a profound revisioning. In this process, humanity seems to be going through a dramatic deconstruction of its old identity and worldview, a kind of symbolic dying and transformation that may be necessary to avoid more literal forms of dying and destruction. Because worldviews create worlds, and worldviews are shaped by our individual and collective psyches, our collective future depends on the willingness of enough individuals and communities to undergo that depth of transformation and awakening that can support our civilization's re-entry into the larger community of being from which modern Homo sapiens has imagined itself to be fundamentally separate. There is probably no one alive today who possesses as broad and profound a practical knowledge of the processes of deep psychological transformation and non-ordinary states of consciousness as does Stanislav Grof. For over 60 years, Grof has courageously worked with thousands of individuals as they explored their inner depths in the service of healing, spiritual awakening, liberating their minds and souls, and opening their doors of perception. The present work summarizes this extraordinary lifetime of experience and accumulated knowledge of a domain that most psychology and psychotherapy today has barely allowed itself to recognize, let alone explore and adequately understand. Grof's expanded cartography of the psyche, based on 6 decades of clinical experience and thousands of session reports, brought forth a new and much deeper understanding of the etiology of emotional and psychosomatic disorders. By introducing such concepts as coex systems, basic perinatal matrices, BPMs, and the contents of the transpersonal domain of the unconscious, Grof was able to connect and integrate the ideas of Sigmund Freud, C.G. Jung, Otto Rank, Wilhelm Reich, as well as Carl Abram, Sandor Ferenczi, and Melanie Klein, among others, into a comprehensive understanding of the human psyche.
Yeah, so one of the reasons why Stan's work is so important for psychonauts and for just the larger collective, the larger evolution of our collective consciousness is because, traditional psychology as it developed in the West through Freud is something that's kind of it's birthed from a historical exploration of the universe as a materialistic, mechanistic phenomenon in which the meaning that is experienced in human beings is the meaning that largely resides in our own psychology and is kind of divorced from the universe itself carrying any sort of intrinsic meaning. And within that psychology, we have a Freudian framework that involves the different stages of development of the human being and the neuroses that reside in the biographical story of our life. So that means like what happened to us in our life, what happened to us in our recent life, what happened to us in our childhood, our infancy, things like that. And so that's really been the foundation for Western psychology. And to some extent, it remains the foundation. And what Grof did, kind of following on the heels of Jung, is that he, through his work with LSD, with psychedelics, LSD in particular, he discovered that the realm of human experience is much more expanded than that Freudian framework. We're not just limited in our experience of consciousness to the biographical realm, in other words, like memories that we've had in our biological body and our biographical life. He discovered that the human psyche can access a whole varied array of consciousness experiences. That's why it's called the expanded cartography, because he discovered through working with like around 4,000 sessions, depth sessions with LSD and other psychedelics with his study participants, he discovered that what they were able to access transcended basically their biographical story and their biological body. And then he was able to map the different terrains, and that's why it's the expanded cartography. It's an expanded map in which we have the general sense of the places that consciousness can go in the realm of human experience. And that's the expanded cartography. And so we'll talk a bit about that. I just want to bring up a fundamental discovery that he had in this larger discovery. He discovered that there's this organizational principle in the human mind in which human thought and memory, and very importantly, the human emotional state, is organized around something, what he defined as systems of condensed experience. And that's shortened to COEX systems. It means that the state that we're in, the thoughts that we think, the memories that we have, they tend to be organized, almost like rings of a tree are organized in concentric circles around a centralized emotional tone or emotional quality. And so if we see the world, say, we're kind of like in a depressive state, we see the world as quite challenging, quite heavy, quite burdensome. What he discovered in these experiences with LSD and other psychedelics is that what often comes up are memories that kind of reinforce that feeling, that state. And the state is a feeling that we have internally. It's also our sense, our very convincing sense of the world. The world is like this, and we are like this, and this is how we feel. And the psychedelic kind of jostles that behavior pattern loose. So we start to experience, there are earlier memories that had this tone to it. Maybe memories a few years back, maybe going back to memories that happened when we were young, maybe young adult or adolescent, or even in childhood, or even when we were a toddler or in infancy. And then he even discovered that you can go back further than that, experience birth trauma, and go back further than that, experience past life experiences of collective consciousness. There's that basically transpersonal experiences that transcend, again, the personal biology and biography. And so in all these experiences, there tends to be a centralized emotional quality that ties them together. So as we go through those memories, it's like we're counting back through the rings of a tree, recent memories, earlier. And then we get, to infancy, birth trauma, past life, whatever it is. And basically we realize that unprocessed emotional material, kind of creates this COEX system in which there's kind of like a repetition of the themes, that get amassed over time. And really the call there is for us to actually experience in an attitude of surrender, fully surrender to and experience the actual emotional tone at the center of that COEX system, rather than there's going to be memories involved, but the important thing is to actually experience the emotional tone fully And in doing so, we actually transcend that coex altogether, and we're not limited to, constantly being revisited by those memories. Not only that, living in a world that is actually shaded with the color of that coex system. So that is kind of the one of the healing mechanisms and transcendent qualities of working with psychedelics or any spiritual practice that allows that depth of transformation in which we can actually experience surrender to, experience and release the emotional tone at the center of a coex. So that's what I wanted to just touch upon here, is his expanded cartography, and also this fundamental principle at the base of it, which is the systems of condensed experience, coex systems. And Art, why don't you take us to the next stage of this expanded cartography?
All right, thanks. That was great. Let's discuss the 4 basic perinatal matrices, which gets a little more specific about what James was talking about. For instance, Stan, in his sessions, LSD sessions, and in patient sessions, they were reporting that they were reliving their birth. And Stan had the same experience. And through time, he developed the 4 basic perinatal matrices. And here they are. The first one is a little being in the womb. Everything's okay. There's food, elimination. Life is good. The next phase, phase 2, it's not okay anymore. Being crushed in the mother's body, the first stage of delivery. Every time mom breathes, you're crushed against her. A little uncomfortable, a little frustrating. You might say the origin of frustration in life. Can't move, can't scream. Then, through time, the cervix opens a little bit. But this large baby, this large fetus, how's it going to get out of that small opening? Then the third stage of delivery begins, where the mother's body changes. Incredible energy is taking place inside of her. Things are moving, where eventually the baby is propelled through the birth canal, and 4 is released right there. We're born. Hey. Those are the 4 basic perinatal matrices. And since we experience those before we're born, okay, and we have no way to really express them, what could happen later as we're alive, whenever we're feeling feelings of relaxation and ease and feeling good, that's similar to BPM-1, okay? Whenever we're frustrated, freaked out, can't actualize what we want, no way out in life, well, there's BPM-2. You ever have that? BPM-3, where everything is intense. Energy is really intense, and it's almost as if you're being possessed when you act. It's BPM-3. And 4, sudden release from custody. Whew, relaxation. BPM-4, later in life. Let's talk about the transpersonal, shall we? I'm going to talk about the transpersonal domain, okay? Transpersonal generally refers to experiences bigger than you are. Things that happen in the regular world every day, following the laws of life, are everyday experiences. Transpersonal is bigger. I'll give you a couple of examples from my sessions, if I may. Okay. I was feeling really sad. I was feeling so sad and of stuff that happened to me. And then that kind of opened up into the heart of sadness, the origin of sadness. And I felt in touch with every person that's ever been sad, that's alive now. And every being that's ever been sad in any way previously, and every being that's going to be sad in the future. So I guess I would call that a transpersonal experience. And another one I had as well was in session where I was riding a horse, and it was really happening. I was riding really fast and just really into it. And then next thing you know, I'm the horse. And the guy was riding me. It was the same energy. And I was like, wow. So those would be two examples of transpersonal experiences. And this is part of what Stan discovered in his extended cartography of the psyche. You want to say
Yeah, I
something?
can add to that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so just as an example, I had an experience in ayahuasca session in which I experienced myself as like a baby snake in a kind of, I guess you could say, a litter or something of baby snakes of a giant kind of anaconda like mother snake. It was kind of like the powerful force of Mother Nature embodied in an animal. And then the animal changed, and it was like I was a baby bird with various other baby birds, and the Mother Nature in that case manifested as a giant, impressive bird of prey. And so that was kind of like an experience of Mother Nature in as an animal instinctual being, and myself was a part of that kind of system. And that's an example of a transpersonal experience, because that obviously transcends my biographical story. I am a human being. I was born as a human being. I've never been a baby bird or baby snake. And it transcends my biological experience, because my biological body is a human body. It's limited to the experience of a human body. So it transcended both of those. So that would be that would be defined as a transpersonal experience, transcendent of the personal. So that's another example there. Sure. Yeah. So thanks for tuning in for episode 1 of our podcast here. And we'll see you in 2 weeks. We're going to come back with more. We're going to go continuously deeper into this exploration that we've opened up for you here today. So thanks for joining us. I'm James Moran. I can be found at jamesmoran.org.
And I'm Art Granoff. We're going to continue with more basic perinatal matrices and more of Stan's work from Way of the Psychonaut. And you can find me at referenceastrology.com. See you in a couple of weeks.